Taking Liberty and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and the Millennial joining me today is Garrick Ross. And of course, Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer, and our producer, Adam Katora. And I just want to thank Garrick for combing his hair before he came today. You can tell he's been quarantined for a long time.
I'm going to look good for YouTube and Twitter, Mark.
That's right. So it's time to take back liberty. And the name of the podcast is Taking Liberty. And of course, the dumbest bill in America. So look, we've been watching Dr. Fauci with the Trump administration at the various press conferences, as well as Dr. Birx. And Dr. Fauci has been getting on mainstream media, TV as well, independently of course, the appearances at the White House. And he's been speaking in interviews with Jake Tapper, with Brian Williams, with OAN Network, which is the One America Network. We have clips from these because it's interesting, because I'm not necessarily sure I agree that during a pandemic, someone who is technically a government employee, even though they have this great education and great resume, should they be going on all the different networks and saying, in many cases, different things depending on who the network is? I find that kind of interesting, to say the least. And so here's Jake Tapper. He's asking Dr. Fauci if lives would have been saved if Trump had just shut the country down sooner, back in February. Now, of course, Fauci wasn't talking about that previously during the press conferences, but naturally this is what the media is hanging their hat on since this is an election year. And we have a clip on that. And here is the clip.
Do you think lives could have been saved if social distancing, physical distancing, stay-at-home measures had started third week of February instead of mid-March?
You know, Jake, again, it's the what would have, what could have. It's very difficult to go back and say that. I mean, obviously, you could logically say that if you had a process that was ongoing and you started mitigation earlier, you could have saved lives. Obviously, no one is going to deny that. But what goes into those kinds of decisions is complicated. But you're right. I mean, obviously, if we had right from the very beginning shut everything down, it may have been a little bit different. But there was a lot of pushback about shutting things down back then.
So there's Fauci, of course, saying one thing on CNN to Jake Tapper, which is, well, yeah, we probably should have closed things down. And yes, lives would have been saved. Interesting because of the fact that I'm pretty certain the American people wouldn't have bought into that in February because it was so early. There was so little information and so little data that was available about what was actually happening that how can you be president of the United States and shut things down? Nonetheless, this is Fauci saying one thing when he's on stage with Trump and going to CNN. And of course, CNN corners him. And Fauci obviously is very political. And he answers the question that Jake Tapper asked, which is, yeah, we would have saved lives. Of course we'd save lives. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I didn't really read that as him saying that that's what we should have done, or that was like the what everybody thought to do back then. I just kind of took that as like, in a perfect world, if nobody was interacting with anybody for a long period of time, then naturally, yeah, the number of infections across the board would have been down, and then subsequently people's lives would have been saved. I didn't really read into that as him saying that, like, well, this is something we should have done, and, you know, we dropped the ball by doing it.
Yeah, I did, unfortunately. I mean, it's interesting because what I heard him saying was on the stage with Trump is, you know, we've taken extraordinary measures to save lives. And then, you know, Jake Tapper asks him a question, well, had you taken even more extraordinary measures even earlier, would more lives have been saved? Well, that's a gotcha question, first of all. And what Fauci should be doing is not even going on networks. That's my personal opinion. He shouldn't even be talking to any of the networks. He should be talking to, instead, all of the networks at the same time at the press conference. Yeah, at which time he's a government employee. He's critically important to this entire conversation. He shouldn't be allowed to go on these separate networks where they're actually going to play the whole gotcha thing because it's a political year. It's an election year.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I'm all for, you know, him being a surrogate for the administration or for the administration's response team. But I think what that comes with is being on the same page as the administration and having at least a coordinated response to answers like that, where everybody kind of knows what he's going to say and not say. Because otherwise, you're going off the reservation and you're not doing a service to the administration you serve, because you're an unelected bureaucrat. And you know, while he may be in a position with the NIH and the infectious disease program, it still comes with a lot of responsibilities to the political awareness that position should have, given that he's been around for 6 administrations and he's been working with both sides of the aisle.
Sure. I mean, look, Fauci on the 29th of February, that's the last day of February.
Right before things really kicked off,
That's
got
exactly
very
right.
bad. Yeah.
That's exactly right. On OAN, the One America Network, Fauci went on that network as well. So he's obviously, look, this guy likes the limelight. He's going on all the individual networks. I think that in and of itself, as I've already stated, is a huge mistake. He should not be permitted to do that.
He was on networks like OAN. He did a lot of different networks and did a lot of different types of media to kind of go out there and talk. I mean, he was on. I'm a big Barstool fan. He was on. He was on the Pardon My Take podcast, which is like 2 guys who just sit around and goof about sports and make meme culture fun. And he was on that talking about it. He was on One America. He's on your primetime news networks. He's been everywhere.
And that's my point. My point is, this is a pandemic. He should be talking in one voice with the President of the United States and all the medical professionals at the press conference with all the press there. And why not have Barstool Sports go there as well? I mean, Barstool Sports, of course, obviously some people actually do get their news from there.
Yeah.
And I know it's funny and so forth. But
there aren't people out there. Not everybody out there is like you or me, Mark. We sit and watch politics and we watch the news. Some people just couldn't care less about politics.
Guilty as charged.
They like sports and they like to be left alone and make jokes on the internet.
That's true.
That's where they get their news on the world.
So Fauci goes on the last day of February 29th, on the One America Network, and he says something completely different on the 29th. And of course, the clip that you heard previously where Jake Tapper was talking to Fauci, that clip just came from 2 days ago, where Fauci says, well, yeah, we could have saved lives if we shut things down sooner. Well, here's Fauci on the 29th of February saying something completely different on OAN. And here's the clip.
So, Dr. Fauci, it's Saturday morning in America. People are waking up right now with real concerns about this. They want to go to malls and movies, maybe the gym as well. Should we be changing our habits? And if so, how?
No, right now, at this moment, there is no need to change anything that you're doing on a day-by-day basis. Right now, the risk is still low, but this could change. I've said that many times, even on this program. You've got to watch out because although the risk is low now, you don't need to change anything you're doing. When you start to see community spread, this could change and force you to become much more attentive to doing things that would protect you from spread.
And that was the 29th of February, where when you start to see community spread, then you have to take some measures, maybe even extraordinary measures that Dr. Fauci said. Well, what he's basically saying is on February 29th, as one of the most important folks in the medical field about infectious diseases, he wasn't aware that this was an issue as of February 29th. So you can't have it both ways. That's kind of where I'm going with this. What are your thoughts? I mean, clearly millennials are looking at all this stuff and they're, of course, getting unemployed en masse because of the fact that they can't even go to work and they're being laid off. At what point is this guy going to be held accountable for not just being political, but saying 2 different things?
I think you and I think we see the same interview and I think we hear 2 different things. And I think, again, part to your point that this is a little bit of the problem is that when he's going out there and saying things, there's not this consistent message. It gets lost to a lot of people in a lot of different translations. For me, I see those 2 press conferences as I see them kind of talking about the same thing, in February when information was still very little with all the issues coming out of China and the lack of transparency, him saying, this is what the disease looks like to me. I don't think anybody should be doing anything different because the risk of translation is low. And then you have in this March interview where he says, if we went back and we did it all and we knew what we knew now and we
would have saved lives.
We would have saved lives. And there's I don't think there's really a disagreement with that. I mean, if nobody ever left their house all the time ever,
But keep in mind that the whole purpose of Jake Tapper in the first clip asking Fauci about would we have saved lives, because the whole point is to be able to create a nexus with the Trump administration saying people died.
I agree Tapper has this question for an agenda. I think, though, that Fauci gets a lot of, that people put on that there's a lot of motivation and why he says certain things. And I think not a lot of it comes out of hostility. I think he just answers questions to answer questions. And
agreed.
And then, sometimes these are the sound bites that come out of it,
and
for better or for worse.
That's the point. Should he be on all of these different networks individually, rather than having all of the networks show up at the press conference, which they're already doing, and Fauci present and answer questions really thoroughly with Dr. Birx, as they're already doing. But I think Fauci likes the limelight without question.
Some people like it, Mark.
And that's problematic. That's
Yeah.
problematic because now we're getting different kind of views and different opinions, and we're getting different ideas in the clips. And I agree with you. You could maybe listen to these clips and maybe hear kind of the same thing. I'm not. I'm hearing someone who is kind of playing politics and also doing a CYA because he wants to keep his job. But here is Fauci with Brian Williams, yet another clip. And Brian Williams is interviewing Fauci on MSNBC about getting the economy back to normal and testing. Like, when is that going to happen? And of course, this is now the big issue. First, the issue was hydroxychloroquine doesn't work. And then the issue was, well, why didn't you shut down the economy sooner? Which, of course, is what they're talking about in these clips. And now it's, well, when is the economy going to open? And isn't there going to be a danger if we open the economy? Well, here's Brian Williams asking Fauci just that in this clip, and here it is.
In your perfect world, though, if Dr. Fauci ran the country, would you test 327 million Americans?
You know, I mean, obviously you would like to know that. That's not the primary thing right now. The primary thing is to essentially turn the corner on those areas that are hardest hit, the New York, the New Orleans, the Detroits. Right now we're seeing the possibility of upticks in other areas right here in the Washington, D.C. area and Baltimore. That's the thing you want to do right now. In a perfect world, as you said, of course, as we get months from now and we have literally an unlimited amount of tests for antibody, of course it would be very interesting to see, and it could be helpful to us, how many people have actually been exposed and immune.
So there you have it. You know, yet another interview with Fauci, a recent interview in this particular case of, well, when you're going to open up the economy, well, won't there be a problem if you open up the economy because more people could get infected? I mean, while these are fair questions, these are the same questions that are being asked in the press conference, and they're fair questions. All of them are fair questions. But it does bother me that this doctor is becoming very political and that he's going on all of the individual networks by himself and kind of mixing things up a little bit. And there's no doubt in my mind, he's all about protecting his job. That's what I think. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything is political is how the famous quote goes.
Not supposed to be with medicine.
No, but even medicine, you know, as you're seeing right now,
Science.
It's science, but it's all political because it all has political implications and things like that. And so I agree that definitely Fauci is always playing CYA, but anybody's always playing CYA.
That's why he shouldn't be doing it, though, Garrick, because it's by definition, Fauci is not supposed to be political. He's supposed to give you the cold, hard facts with science backing it, and then the President of the United States gets to make the political decision. Fauci is acting as he's a politician, which I've long since thought that's what NIH has become anyway. And the president even alluded to that at the very beginning about how NIH actually missed this whole thing.
Right.
But go ahead.
Yeah, this is always tough though because part of me is not sympathetic to Fauci, but I appreciate his role in this, and that he generally is probably the most sophisticated mind on this topic, and he is really integral to the process. And so I understand a lot of people's not confusion, but disdain for a lot of the ways that he's approaching the media and the way he's been very cozy with going on and giving his own, not unvetted answers, but, giving his own narrative aside from the administration's coordinated response.
He seems to have a lot of free time going on his networks.
Yeah.
A lot of free time. And that is bothersome. That's because you're saying, well, shouldn't you be spending your time at the NIH?
Yeah.
I mean,
you would think,
on the networks?
Doing research and things like that, or working with the coronavirus response team and things like that.
And then you have that opportunity to talk about what is happening at the press conferences where all of the media is present. But he's spending a lot of his extra time individually on these other media outlets. And that's really my point. And the Wall Street Journal, by the way, I think is reporting, I know they just reported a story. Trump retweets call for Dr. Fauci to be fired over coronavirus comments. So apparently there was a tweet calling for Dr. Fauci to be fired over his comments on all of these individual networks. And Trump retweeted that. So Trump didn't call for his firing, but he retweeted.
I think that's his shot
I think is
across
funny.
Fauci's bow, where he's like, hey, man, you're getting a little too comfortable over there. Just remember what your role is. And if you want to see a 7th administration, you'll play ball over here.
Yeah, because Fauci's served in 6 administrations consecutively, which is incredible.
Yeah.
Right? So obviously he's a
yeah.
politician. Fauci might be a brilliant medical mind and science.
Yeah, but there's a difference between
but
working.
he's a politician.
Yeah, there's
too.
a difference between working in at Johns Hopkins for 30 years and working in the NIH for 30 years.
Absolutely.
One of those you only have one boss, and it's typically the same boss. But
Yes.
at the other one, you kind of do have to play games to stick around for a while, because as administrations come and go, they tend to want their own person in there, and you can't always adhere to everybody. So a lot of people get cut loose or thrown off the boat, but somehow through all of this, Fauci has remained not just on the boat, but he's been steering the boat.
So on Sunday evening, the story is, in the Wall Street Journal, Mr. Trump retweeted a message from a former Republican congressional candidate attacking Fauci. It says, Fauci is now saying that had Trump listened to medical experts earlier, he could have saved more lives, wrote Deanna Lorraine, who was a former congressional candidate who challenged Speaker Nancy Pelosi in her San Francisco area district. And specifically, Deanne Lorraine said in her tweet, Fauci is now saying that had Trump listened to the medical experts earlier, he could have saved more lives. Fauci was telling people on February 29th that there was nothing to worry about and it posed no threat to the U.S. public at large. And you heard those clips. And Trump, not only does he retweet it, he puts, sorry, fake news. It's all on tape. I banned China long before people spoke up. Thank you, OANN, the network that also was interviewing Fauci about this very issue. Kind of fascinating. Thoughts on this retweet from Trump?
I think it's funny that he's praising OAN because if you noticed, Fox has been in the doghouse in a couple of the most recent weeks. He's been pretty fed up with them, especially Chris Wallace. But
yeah, but the issue here is really
Yeah.
Fauci playing political games, going on the individual networks. He really shouldn't be doing it. Fauci's obviously a survivor because, as you said, he survived across 6 administrations. He's doing the exact same thing here. And now, as you said, Trump just retweeted something and shot,
gave him his warning shot and
Yes.
said, you're getting a little comfortable, it's time to relax.
Exactly.
I think this is an interesting dynamic and a look at, for a lot of people at home, this is a look at a lot of the Washington, D.C. power struggle, but it's a very, very viewable one. Things like this go on all the time in politics, but this is one of the rare occasions where you get to see it play out in real time and in a very visible and open place. And I think Fauci would probably be served well for his own personal career aspirations, though he is pretty old and been around a while, so I have no idea how long he wants to stick around. Or if
I
this
think
is
he
it
wants
for
to
him.
stick around forever. There's no doubt.
To kind of play ball with the administration, and I think typically from my beliefs of the role of the bureaucracy, that is his responsibility, and that is to be a team player and not to be a rogue or Do
you think Fauci survives between now and November, the election day?
I don't think it's expedient for Trump to fire him. I think it would look very bad.
He still has Dr. Birx.
And whether he
still has Dr. Birx.
But
he can elevate someone else in Fauci's position.
Yeah.
And say, look, I think Dr.
But
Fauci.
Fauci's a household name. I think one of the things that have come out of Fauci's frequent views on the media and being around on the media is everybody in America knows who Dr. Anthony Fauci is now. And it would look terrible to a lot of average human beings for
I don't
him.
think Trump cares, by the way.
I know Trump doesn't care, but I
By
think
definition, he doesn't care because he just retweeted something from a former congressional candidate who said he should be fired. And Trump retweeted it. What Trump should do, and first of all, I completely agree with the retweet, but he should also have a conversation with Fauci, if he hasn't already, and said, we have press conferences. You work for me.
Yeah.
We're supposed to talk about all this at the press conferences because the entire press corps is present, and you shouldn't be going on individual networks that are basically agenda-driven, trying to catch you and play gotcha.
I also don't think Fauci will be fired because I think Fauci is in a rare place where if you look at him, yes, this is all public now and everybody's been talking about this relationship between Fauci and Trump, but I think this conversation has been going on quietly in the background. For anybody who's been paying attention has seen it for quite a while now. I mean, Fauci has had an unprecedented degree of autonomy in the Trump administration that a lot of Trump officials have not had, and he's gotten away with more that people in Trump's administration have been fired for way less.
That's because this is new.
Because this is new, and
a pandemic is pretty much very new and unexpected.
Yeah, and Trump has kind of let Fauci do his own thing, and so I think Fauci is reaping the reward of that, but I also don't see Trump firing Fauci as a result of that.
And so look, the podcast is called Taking Liberty, and Scott McKay, a writer at the American Spectator, wrote an article entitled The Dual Reckoning to Come. And he writes, there should be a lot of scalp taking of political leaders, particularly at the state and local levels, in order to call from the herd those who have been most fervent in assailing the freedom of association and our Fourth Amendment rights, referring to, of course, the politicians who have done that. Putting bar owners and non-essential retail operators out of business while allowing abortion clinics and grocery stores to remain open is a stain on proper governance, and it ought to be damned expensive to the politicians who made that call. It was an excellent article, and it's a great point. His point being, I'm not saying you should close grocery stores because people should eat, but the fact of the matter is that you're keeping abortion clinics open, grocery stores open, and at the same time, you're telling others that they have to close, and there should be certainly hell to pay when the elections come for these politicians who have literally put people's businesses out of business and people out of work who used to work for those businesses.
He talks about the Fourth Amendment, and I think he's framing this argument from the perspective that government is taking a lot of these arbitrary actions and basically punishing a lot of private citizens who have done nothing wrong without due process.
Yes, absolutely. So look, Bill Maher, of all people, Bill Maher, we've got like several really short clips from him. It's fantastic. So Bill Maher, he actually can be extraordinarily funny. I just want to say this for the record. He's the one who was saying not long ago that he hopes not only Trump fails, but he hopes that the economy crashes.
Yeah. And
that's the way you get Trump out of office, since Trump's creds are really as an economics guy and a business person. Bill Maher did say that. So that was kind of a stupid thing to say, even though that's supposed to be funny because Bill Maher is a comedian. Well, he has quite a following, and I got to tell you, he just spoke about the pandemic, and what he just said about the pandemic, about China in particular, and the PC police, the politically correct folks who they just don't want to call China out on this because they say, no, you're going to indict Chinese Americans. And so you get basically a Bill Maher making fun of the politically correct crowd, the progressives. And we have a clip on this. It's really hysterically funny. If you get a chance, listening to it is one thing. It's even funnier because at the end, he has some pictures there that are, of course, no Republican could get away with that. In fact, if a Republican or a comedian who happened to be more on the conservative side showed the same thing, they would probably be removed from Twitter. So here is the clip with Bill Maher.
Life and death. We're barely 4 months into this pandemic, and the wet markets in China, the ones where exotic animals are sold and consumed, are already starting to reopen. The PC police say it's racist to attack any cultural practice that's different than our own. I say liberalism lost its way when it started thinking like that and pretended that forcing a woman to wear this was just a different way instead of an abhorrent human rights violation.
So he's basically saying liberalism lost its way when it said that it was just a different way of living to wear a burqa, because he shows a picture of a bunch of women that are wearing burqas and are completely covered. Their entire bodies are covered, including their faces. You can't make out who they are. And he said, Maher is saying, look, these are the same people who think that that's okay because it's a different way of living, rather than using common sense and saying that's disgusting. Thought about that. I want to hear the millennial perspective on this, for sure.
Bill Maher's spot on. I mean, I've always been, I've enjoyed watching Bill Maher despite, our very different political, leanings, because
Actually,
I think comedy
I
is
do as well.
comedy, and I think Bill, for as much as he's a liberal, he has well-rounded panels. If you ever get a chance to watch the Bill Maher show, just watch it once.
He tends to be more of the classic liberal.
Very open-minded, and while he is still a liberal, he is
no doubt
very intellectual and is willing to debate the topics and not just scream racism, bigotry, xenophobia, and the whole lot. And he'll have the conversation with you, and there's causes like this where politicians are wrong, and he is willing to tell them that they're wrong, and that the PC police is wrong, and that they're wrong. He's free to have a lot of these discussions, and it's good for America to listen to that kind of rounded voice that Bill always advocates for.
It really is. He continues in the same monologue. We have another clip where he says, "Look, this has everything to do with China, and not Asian Americans, and you can actually use your brain and be a critical thinker and figure this out and stop being politically correct." Once again, same monologue. We have this clip. You got to listen to it. Here it is.
Sorry, Americans, we're going to have to ask you to keep two ideas in your head at the same time. This has nothing to do with Asian Americans, and it has everything to do with China. We can't afford the luxury anymore of non-judginess towards a country with habits that kill millions of people everywhere, because this isn't the first time. SARS came from China, and the bird flu, and the Hong Kong flu, the Asian flu. Viruses come from China like shortstops come from the Dominican Republic.
Like shortstops. Viruses come from China like shortstops come from the Dominican Republic. It's pretty awesome. And can imagine, once again, I'm really happy that it was Bill Maher that said this, because imagine if you are a comedian and you happen to be known as a comedian that is maybe right of center.
They would have thrown Ben Shapiro off Twitter.
Absolutely.
They would have.
Twitter would have banned him.
Yep.
And in fact, you probably may have, if you had the good fortune of being on any one of the networks, they probably would have taken you off.
Yeah.
For saying that. But the fact of the matter is, it's common sense.
Yeah.
I mean, do millennials get this?
It is a pattern. It is certainly something that is observable, and anybody with objective thinking and sees all these things coming out of China realizes that China is a big deal, and this is a bad thing that they do, and somehow they don't seem to get the hint, because every time this happens, China will shut down for 4 weeks, and they'll say, we're going to get rid of these wet markets, and then without fail they come back, because to China, the economic boom that these, exotic wet markets that people are willing to pay hand over fist for these animals.
It's also cultural.
And cultural issues are so much more, beneficial to them than the health and well-being of not just their own country, but in this case, the whole world.
But isn't Maher also saying that I don't care about the cultural proclivities of China or
we shouldn't be saying, and we shouldn't avoid being critical of them simply because we're trying to be delicate with their cultural respect. If their cultural respect is wrong, it is wrong.
It's wrong. You
just
wear a
because
burqa,
it's different
it's
doesn't
bad.
mean that it's okay and that we should look the other way, especially when it has global health implications like this one does.
Absolutely.
And it's important that I think that you and I address why we're talking about this. One, it's a great topic, but also why we're pretty defending Bill is because after Bill put this out there, the PC police did exactly what Bill said the PC police was going to do, and they went after him and they said, how dare you? Why would you say these things? It's racist, xenophobia, and why are you a liberal, et cetera, et cetera. And they're all missing the point. They all just shove their heads in the sand and expect to be caught, that this is just going to reconcile itself and that China can go about its business as normal and we'll just all be fine. And when this does happen 4 years from now, it's going to be for some other reason, and it has nothing to do with these wet markets.
Absolutely, and you're right on Twitter, because that's where this particular monologue is posted on Twitter by Bill Maher. I mean, he's being attacked like crazy on Twitter by the left, on the PC police, as you said. And it's like, well, wow, he's not one of us anymore. Oh my gosh, how can he say that? That's racist and so forth. It's absurd. It's absurd. And thank goodness there is someone who is watched by the left, who's Bill Maher, who's considered to be, one of them, who's actually critically thinking about this issue and trying to get people to come together as a nation.
Yeah.
And actually
think
try to
about
hold
things critically.
accountable.
Yeah. And, be a voice for reason that other people can look at and be like, I trust Bill, and if Bill's saying this, maybe we should look into this more. And this is an uncharted territory for Bill. Bill is, in his own right, very provocative, and Bill does talk about a lot of things that the left, hilarious, but he does talk about a lot of things that the left finds deplorable and that the right finds deplorable. And, Bill's never really cared what anybody thinks of him. But in a time like this where we're talking about, basically the fundamental view of the world here in kind of an associative way, it's important that people's voices like Bill's get out there and talked about, that people realize that he's not saying this just to be funny or to be provocative, but there's a legitimate reason behind his thinking.
It is, and he goes on to say in the final clip of Bill Maher's monologue, and it's a short one, about how we need to hold China accountable. And here is the clip.
And China can do this. China once built a 57-story skyscraper in 19 days. There's been a pothole on my street for 19 years. They're not like us. They can actually get shit done. This is a dictatorship that for decades enforced a one-child per family policy under penalty of forced sterilization. But you can't close down the farmer's market from hell?
Yeah, there you go. So if they can force people to only have one child, and if you have more, they will sterilize you, as well as they were regularly murdering millions of children at birth, by the way, including post-birth. If here's a country that was doing that, obviously it's a very evil thing.
Yeah.
And we're basically saying, hey, look, the left and the right, we can't hold China accountable to close down these markets in Wuhan.
Yeah, anything the CCP wants, it gets, and we need to put the CCP on notice that this can't be accepted anymore, and that you have to do something. You can't just, like Bill said, 4 weeks after, you can't just start it all back up again.
And taking back liberty, as you know, it's basically the title of the podcast, and we love talking about. Not just listening to and talking about liberals and their point of view, and including humor, bring humor into the podcast, but also what's happening across America and the taking of liberties.
Yeah.
And one of the dumbest governors in the United States of America, one in which Joe Biden may actually choose as his vice presidential running mate, is Governor Whitmer, who is the governor of Michigan. And she put forth a number of executive orders, one of which is to prohibit grocery stores from selling seeds.
And it's not just seeds. I mean, it's anything that she deems as non-essential sales. I mean, I saw a picture where you couldn't buy a child's car seat. Now tell me what's not essential about a child's car seat.
That's exactly right.
And she's basically going store to store and saying that you can sell this, this, and this, but you can't sell that and the other thing. And it's stupid. Like if she wanted to go to Home Depot, Mark, there is an unprecedented number of dads out there who have decided that this is their time to shine and do housework and do all those honey-do projects they haven't gotten to do in the last 5 years. And that's great. It's a great use of your time. It's a great use of sanity. It's a great way to keep the market going because you got to buy all these supplies and you got to do this, that, and the other thing. But, she basically told Home Depot that you can't sell anything that isn't essential and has this very, stratified list of what is considered essential. And now people can't do anything. They can't. It's just a depredation of liberty. Sorry, I was struggling there, but it's just sometimes it takes me back a little bit.
So look, Governor Whitmer, right, governor of Michigan, said you can't sell seeds. So you can't sell them at Home Depot. You can't sell them at the grocery store because it's not essential.
Heaven
Folks,
forbid you grow your own food and don't go to the store.
We used to have victory gardens. During the last time we had a massive emergency, it was during the wars, World War I and World War II, as well as during the Great Depression, when people would grow their own food because they couldn't afford to buy it or there wasn't enough of it.
Doing their own food because you couldn't buy anything.
So it's not essential? It's not essential to grow your own food? What an idiot this woman is.
Yeah, heaven forbid, you start growing your own food so you don't have to go to the store as much at a time like this and be able to practice further social distancing and things like that.
Exactly. She also banned, Governor Whitmer, once again, the same person, banned travel between residences. So you could have a residence across the street or next to you, and that's considered travel. You can't go to the other residences because she said so.
Yeah.
I mean, and you can't, as you already said, Garrick, you can't buy baby seats. What? You can
can't
go to
buy
a Walmart.
baby seats. You can't buy, lumber or things like that. It's just, and it's a weird list because I feel like there's no, clear, consistent thinking in approaching the situation. It was just basically they put probably things on a chopping block and said yes, no, and here we are with this really weird, set of rules, and a lot of people are up in arms about it.
Yeah, and Fauci
Rightfully
says,
so.
Of course, and among the taking of liberties, Dr. Fauci says we should probably never shake hands again. Thank you, China, for that, right?
Yeah, people are scared.
Just like thank you to the Middle East terrorists and the Muslim terrorists and their entire
Changing the way we approach
warped
airports.
ideology that we have to now go through airports as if we are the criminals.
Yeah.
Because, a bunch of people hijacked planes and crashed them and killed thousands of Americans. And of course, Chicago mayor, but it never applies to the politicians, because Chicago mayor Lori Lightfoot,
This is an otherworldly story.
she violated her own quarantine because she got a haircut. So the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, she, of course, issued the same kind of stay-at-home orders, but she gets a haircut. And that's exactly what you're, quote-unquote, not supposed to do.
And why, Mark? Why did she get a haircut? Well, because she wanted one.
Because she wanted one, and because she could.
And because she can. Because she's Mayor Lori Lightfoot, and we
she's
all need
special.
to bow down to her authority.
Yes, but she doesn't mind taking liberty.
No.
But she can certainly give herself as many liberties as she wants.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Liberty for me, but not for thee.
Absolutely. And speaking of liberty, there's a movie that has been released. It was released about a month ago. And of course, good luck seeing it at a movie theater, because you can't go to a movie theater because they're closed. I presume, I haven't checked, that you can actually watch this movie online, which is, the movie's called The Hunt.
I would imagine that they're probably doing some kind of like streaming deal where you
They
can
probably
rent it
initially
for-
didn't plan on that because, when they released the movie, they thought perhaps you would go to the movie theaters. But now, since then, movie theaters are closed. So I would presume you could probably order it on Netflix and maybe Amazon Prime. Who knows where else?
Yeah.
But the movie The Hunt, we got to set this up. It's a movie about killing deplorables. It was initially made and produced as a movie whereby the liberal elites who are in charge of government would have an opportunity to get guns, which is kind of funny, right? Because liberal elites say you're not supposed to have guns, but we all know that they have their guards and so forth. And they go out and they hunt deplorables for fun in the countryside.
Yeah.
And then that was the initial idea of the movie. And then, of course, they changed the movie around. They edited it somewhat because there was a lot of pushback, because folks were saying, well, not only is this terrible timing during a pandemic, is there ever really good timing? Really good time to do this? Probably not, because the idea that you would want to murder for sport your fellow Americans,
Political dissidents,
is disgusting.
Yeah.
Because, the idea is you're supposed to have a conversation, not have, an opportunity to slaughter people. So we have a really super short clip on this to give you all the information you want to know about the movie The Hunt. And here is the clip.
What is all of this?
Did you see that article? Every year, these liberal elites kidnap a bunch of normal folks like us and hunt us for sport.
Yeah, a bunch of normal folks like us who live in the countryside, the liberal elites do, and they kill us for sport.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Come on, Millennial. Let's hear what you have to say about this.
Either
You probably
really
like it.
tone deaf or probably the greatest marketing stunt in human history, because I'll tell you what, I remember in like January, February, people were talking about this. And it was a huge deal because, is it ever really a good time to portray political dissidents killing political, different like people? No, and especially with the divide in American culture over politics right now, is it a very good idea to have Democrats killing Republicans, or vice versa? And the answer is probably always no.
Always no.
But
always.
I don't know that he was ever intending to release the movie in that state. I think probably he was just trying to draw up some conversation and people to look at his movie, because now people like you and me were talking about it. It's been on every podcast I've listened to, TV, and so I think everybody wanted to watch it when it came out to see what it was all about.
And people are upset anyway.
Very upset
because
anyway.
they're not able to work.
Yeah.
Perhaps they lost their job. Perhaps they're going to lose their company. And now we're putting this movie out there to give people, an opportunity to maybe act on their unhappiness? It's disgusting. I'm sorry. I have a problem with that.
Now I'll have to watch the movie to make sure that, it is as tame as some people say it is, because I've seen mixed reviews about it. Some people say,
Likewise,
it was
yeah.
just a good movie, and other people say, it really is just a really bad concept for a movie,
And the timing is bad.
And the timing is bad.
And I still believe in free speech. They absolutely
Yeah.
have a right to. So all you know out there in podcast land, the producers of the movie have an absolute right to put this movie out there.
That
and push
doesn't
it
mean
out.
you and I have to like it.
It doesn't mean we have to like it. It also
Exactly.
doesn't mean that it couldn't cause civil unrest.
Yeah.
And
or
I think
anxiousness, anxiety, things like that.
Civil unrest is a really bad idea. But the government, since, of course, the name of this podcast is Taking Liberty, the more liberties the government is taking from individuals, the more likely they're going to foment civil unrest, and it's not something I would support, that is to say, civil unrest. I think it's a bad idea, but we need to start pushing back on government on these liberties that they're taking from us, because people need to get back to work. And we have to stop, I think we have to start using our common sense that if grocery stores can be open, which they should be because you need food, doesn't matter what the grocery store sells, but if you need to get a haircut, maybe don't get the shampoo person to shampoo your hair since they're so close to you. Maybe just have a haircut and maybe have the individual who's cutting your hair wear a mask or a face guard or both, and you wear a mask too. There are ways around this, folks, to get people back to work. Just saying.
Yeah, I think, that's probably the two goals we have to keep in mind. And I was listening to the Cuomo press conference earlier, and he was talking about this, and he was saying, we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, and we have to look at the cogs. He is big on metaphors, but so this is probably
the cogs. What is a cog?
So he's basically saying that all these things work together. So you have the schools, transportation, the economy, and these things all work together. And so we have to manage the public health cog and make sure that everything is good on the coronavirus front, but also recessions kill people too, and so we have to make sure that the economic machine is turning at the same time too, and we have to be able to look at them and make sure that they're working together, and that as we begin to turn on the faucet, as he says, and let people go back to work, that we're making sure that the issues with coronavirus aren't increasing as well. And so I think we can do it. I think American ingenuity would allow us to do it, and we have to be conscientious of how we go about doing it. But I think that at this rate, it's about getting those cases to zero, practicing good hygiene, social distancing, and getting people who can go back to work. Now, is there going to be industries and places and jobs that you physically can't go to work or shouldn't go to work? Yes, absolutely.
Or individuals who are by nature high risk, who can't go back to work, and perhaps
should your grandparents be running around the store willy-nilly? Absolutely not.
Without being covered.
Yeah,
correct. I agree.
And that is a reality that we have to face until such time as we have a vaccine or we have some kind of medical treatment that is able to facilitate these issues. But
But enough with the taking liberties. Enough of the politicians taking liberties. It's time to get people back to work. This is my personal opinion. And it's time to use common sense, because of course you're always going to get pushback from the left. And perhaps, by the way, just from people who are afraid, saying, no, you could infect other people because you could be asymptomatic, folks. You know what's going to really kill us is to have an economy that no longer works. And we need to get people back to work for that reason. So next up, we have the dumbest bill in America, and we have the dumbest bill in America with a lead up. What do we have, Christopher Hopkins?
Dum 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 dum.
So, sorry, I was singing along because I love that. So that was the lead up to the dumbest bill in America, and the dumbest bill in America is, Garrick, it is banning voter ID in Virginia. Literally getting rid of it and banning it. Banning voter ID in Virginia. Virginia's governor, Ralph Northam.
Everybody's favorite governor in America.
A complete idiot, by the way, and we'll explain to you why he's a complete idiot, not just because of this, but he signed a bill just a couple of days ago that bans voter ID in his state. That is to say, when you go to vote, they don't really care who you are. They don't care if you say, as long as you say you are who you are, then you don't need to show ID. Not important, not necessary. Stupid. Of course, it's going to completely open the door and the floodgates for voter fraud. And it's interesting because Governor Bob McDonnell is the one who implemented voter ID. And of course, Bob McDonnell had his own issues, naturally, because he was ultimately charged with getting a lot of very expensive free gifts from various lobbyists, including a Rolex watch. But it doesn't mean that when the General Assembly at that time in Virginia implemented voter ID that it wasn't a good idea. Of course it was a good idea. So here's Ralph Northam cryptically talking about, he's in front of the Virginia General Assembly just a couple of months ago, talking about voter ID in his State of the State speech. And here he is.
We need to make it easier for people to participate in their government. There's no more fundamental way to do that than to vote. But in recent years, Virginia has steadily added more restrictions on voting. This infringes on our most basic civil right as Americans. We need to make it easier to vote, not harder.
Yeah. So it's basically saying, cryptically, that voter ID makes it harder for people to vote because voter ID is, according to Ralph Northam, without actually saying so, racist. And there are reasons why he couldn't say that, of course, but he certainly says it privately to his peeps. Go ahead.
He has his own history of racism that, makes a lot of these things hard for him to openly address because Ralph Northam, as we said, hasn't had the best history of discretion.
Absolutely.
So, I think, this is pretty on par with him, so.
It is. And so, as I said, Governor Bob McDonnell, who I think was back in 2005, thereabouts, implemented voter ID.
Yeah.
And what happened was Michael Bloomberg, the same Michael Bloomberg who ran for president of the United States and failed miserably, put an enormous amount of money through his various organizations in the state of Virginia to flip the General Assembly.
To the tune of like $40 million.
$40 million to flip it from a Democrat-controlled General Assembly in the House as well as in the Senate, from Republican to Democrat. And so now, because of all the money Michael Bloomberg spent, the Democrats were able to take over both houses. They now have a Democrat governor in Governor Ralph Northam. And what happened? First thing they did.
Well, they went after guns.
They went after guns. And now, of course, they want to make it easier to vote.
Yeah,
easier so that you can now obviously go ahead and not have to show ID. And by the way, do you remember that time when Barack Obama endorsed Ralph Northam when he ran for governor in 2017? We have a really short clip on this, and it's going to lead up to the ultimate. And here is Barack Obama endorsing him. Here's the clip.
Ralph believes that if we're going to talk about our history, then we should do it in a way that heals, not in a way that wounds, not in a way that divides.
So not long thereafter. Right.
Not in a way that divides. Meanwhile, Northam was the one who put out that disgusting ad where it was basically saying that his opponent would run over black kids in his Chevy pickup truck with a Confederate flag on the back.
He did.
Give me a break.
He did. He said that. And of course, so you have Obama endorsing Ralph Northam. Northam wins, of course. He beats Ed Gillespie, who's the Republican. And that's after, as you said, Garrick, that Northam ran these terrible, disgusting ads. Obama comes into the state and does all the campaign and race baiting, which, of course, no one can do that better than Barack Obama. But then, shortly thereafter, Northam is caught because in his yearbook from med school, he was in blackface. In one case, complete blackface.
Well, they have no idea if he was the person wearing blackface or if he was the person wearing the Klan robes.
He was the Klansman, right.
Yeah, he hasn't said one way or the other, but either one, they're both very bad.
So initially he said he was, and then later he said that, well, neither of those pictures are him. Well, it's in his own yearbook, and basically referencing to him. We have a clip on this. And here's good old Ralph Northam. Here's a clip.
Tonight, the calls for Governor Ralph Northam to resign are growing, but the Virginia Democrat refusing to step down. The trouble started when this racist photo emerged from his medical school yearbook page. At first, Northam confirmed he was one of the two men in the photo, but the next day...
I believe then and now that I am not either of the people in that photo.
But then Northam admitted he had appeared in blackface once before, during a dance contest in 1984 where he dressed as Michael Jackson.
All right, Justin Trudeau.
The shoes, I had a glove, and I used just a little bit of shoe polish to put on my cheeks. And the reason I used a very little bit is because I don't know if anybody's ever tried that, but you cannot get shoe polish off.
I don't know if you've ever tried that before, but when you put shoe polish on your face, you have to just use a little bit when you're trying to go blackface because it's really hard to get off of me. This guy's an
experience.
Idiot.
Oh, God.
So this is the same guy, ladies and gentlemen, the same guy who just signed the banning voter ID in Virginia law. He just signed it because he says that voter ID is actually racist because individuals of color can't figure out how to get an ID, and therefore it's racist. Here's the guy that's shepherding that, that's saying that, by the way, first of all, it's completely untrue. Because if you're on any kind of assistance, and that's the argument that you're making, the argument that you're making is African Americans disproportionately are on assistance, public assistance, and are poor, and therefore can't get an ID. That's not true because you need an ID in order to get on the assistance to begin with. So, but here's the guy leading the way, this particular governor, Governor Ralph Northam, saying, well, it wasn't me in blackface. Initially, I thought it was, but, it's even though it's in my actual med school yearbook, really wasn't me. It was probably somebody else. And but I did have blackface once anyway. It's just, but I only used a little bit of
Just
shoe
a little
polish.
bit. It's the amount of shoe polish that matters, Mark. If you use too much, then it's over the line. But if it's just a couple of dashes, you're okay.
And then, by the way, Garrick, the press then asks him, we didn't play the end of that, but the press asked him, they said, well, did you, what were you? What did you dress up as with the shoe polish? He said, well, Michael Jackson. And the press goes, well, could you do the moonwalk when you did that? So
he
looks
was like,
down.
he looks around to go and do it.
He goes, well, there's probably not enough space.
His wife saw it and was like, no.
This is
Absolutely. She
inappropriate.
pulls him and she goes, no, don't do that. Like, because he was about to bust out the moonwalk on stage in the midst of this, big, scandal where he's basically either a Klansman or somebody wearing blackface.
Exactly.
And then the Michael Jackson on top of that. Like,
it's not just the dumbest bill in America, banning voter ID in Virginia, but we have the dumbest governor in America.
He's just
and the biggest hypocrite in
he's-
America.
He's just so ignorant, but not like, he just doesn't, he's unaware of anything. No situational awareness. Can't read a room to save his life.
Well, clearly he's like a frat boy and just wants to go along with the club, right? Because clearly he
Get
was the
along to get
Klansman,
along, yeah.
or he was in blackface, and then he said he wasn't, and then of course he was in blackface acting like Michael Jackson, but only used a little bit of shoe polish, which is just incredible.
Oh, God.
I mean, and the fact that he's
Can
still
you do
there.
the moonwalk?
It's the fact that he's still there, right?
Yeah.
He's still there.
Well, you got interesting
Still governor.
circumstances because not just Northam had the issue, because Lieutenant Governor Fairfax had his rape allegation, and then I believe the state Secretary of State, who's the next in the line of succession, has his own blackface scandal because apparently everybody
And they're all
who's a
Democrats.
Democrat in Virginia has decided that blackface is a good idea.
But they still want to get rid of voter ID because voter ID is racist, even though these are the guys who are the racists that basically have been dressing in blackface. I don't know. I just can't believe this.
And I think he goes about these things to kind of, I believe in his mind, atone for his sins and, try to make up for the discretions that he's made towards the African-American community. It's the people who are, the zealots that tend to have the skeletons buried in their closets.
Exactly. Well, that's it for Mark and the Millennials. That was the last word. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to Garrick Ross, our millennial, and of course, our producer, Adam Katura, who's a millennial. Our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins, who's a millennial. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. See you next time.